Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Baumstein from the Wallace Center at Winrock International. Welcome to this National Good Food Network webinar entitled Value Chain Coordination, Creating Partnership Through Policy, presented in partnership with the Greenbelt Fund. Thanks for joining us today. Here's an overview of the webinar. We'll walk you through the agenda as we go. And I'm just going to say a few words about the Wallace Center and the National Good Food Network to get you oriented. The Wallace Center is a business unit of Winrock International and is the host of the National Good Food Network webinars. Wallace Center has been a leading organization in the movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for 35 years. We develop partnerships, pilot new ideas, and advance solutions to strengthen communities through resilient farming and food systems. National Good Food Network, or NGFN, is an initiative of the Wallace Center that accelerates progress towards our vision. NGFN is a connector. We connect peer-to-peer, peer to expert, and practitioners to best practices and lessons learned. We do all of this at a national scale so that innovations spread rapidly throughout the good food world. You can learn more about the work of the Wallace Center and at wallacecenter.org and National Good Food Network at ngfn.org. We encourage you to dig into all the resources on those sites, including our large collection of archived webinars. This webinar is the last of a four-part series on the practice of value chain coordination, presented in partnership with our friends at the Greenbelt Fund. The Greenbelt Fund is a nonprofit organization that supports and enhances the viability, integrity, and sustainability of agriculture in Ontario and Ontario's Greenbelt. By helping to overcome challenges and support economic growth, the fund's goal is to create systemic change to permanently increase the amount of local food consumed in the province through grants, education, policy, and networking initiatives. The fund's work has generated a 13-fold return on local food investments, permanently changing the food value chain and improving local food awareness and education across the province. As a not-for-profit, the Greenbelt Fund is supported in partnership by the Government of Ontario. So hello to our Canadian friends joining us today. Now we are going to go on to the good stuff. Today we are looking at the VCC role of policy thought leadership. When people think of policy, they often associate that word with the government, be it national level, local government, or anywhere in between. This is obviously an incredibly rich body of work. However, we have lots of partners that do it, Local Food Policy Council, our good friends at the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, and many others. Today, though, we're going to be looking at what we've been calling little p policy, which is organization or business scale rules and principles that increase the amount of good food in the food system. Creating these policies in a way that benefits the entire system and has buy-in across the value chain can be tricky and oftentimes requires an external party or a value chain coordinator to help create solutions that work for everyone. Today, we're going to first look at how a collection of independent businesses, in this case food hubs, were brought together to make a system greater than the sum of its parts. As you listen to this story, consider the critical role of the value chain coordinator. These businesses who occupy a very similar market could easily see each other as competition. With the system-level perspective brought by the value chain coordinator, however, the hubs were able to roll up their sleeves in the spirit of openness, and now we're all benefiting from their coordinated trading network. After we hear from Dan on the Food Hub Trading Network, we'll be hearing from the Center for Good Food Purchasing, which is working in institutional markets across the U.S., whose food purchases make up a total of more than $800 million a year. The center's goal is to make those purchases more sustainable and equitable. Some of you attending this webinar might actually end up bringing the wonderful Good Food Purchasing program into your own community. However, all of us working with institutions as anchors of the good food system can benefit from our presenter Vanessa as she unpacks the design of the Good Food Purchasing program and highlights the key elements of creating purchasing policies that work for actors across the value chain. With that framing, I'm going to introduce Dan Hobbs, who will tell us about how he was able to incubate and implement a successful food hub network in the Rockies. Dan is a lead cooperative development specialist with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union Cooperative Development Center. He has over 20 years agricultural and rural development experience in the U.S. and South America, and formerly served as executive director of Organic Seed Alliance, New Farms, and Nuestras Raíces, all 501c3 organizations. Dan is a fifth-generation Coloradan and a first-generation farmer. With his partner, Dr. Nana Meyer, he owns and operates 2 irrigated farms in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Ellie mentioned, I'm the lead cooperative development specialist with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. We were founded in 1907. We serve the states of Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. We've been working with a cooperative business model Since really the 1920s and 1930s were probably the heyday of cooperatives in this area of the Rockies. And we continue straight on through today with our Cooperative Development Center. As a cooperative specialist, I also served as the value chain coordinator for a region of southern Colorado the past 2 years, and that work prominently featured working with food hubs and developing a food hub trading network. So as we launch into the webinar here, I always like to pay our respects to the people that came before us. We have worked with lots of brick and mortar projects in years past with farmer exchanges and marketing cooperatives, and these food hubs are interestingly similar to the projects of years before. This work with food hubs began in 2014. We referred to it initially as the Colorado Food Hub Network, and it actually began as basically a peer network. We got together with folks from the Wallace Center to learn about food hubs, introduce our various projects, talk about opportunities, barriers to moving food and agricultural products around Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And eventually this group was formalized into what we call the Taproot Cooperative, and that is a cooperative of cooperatives, basically a federated cooperative with 5 founding members. Our first exercise with the Food Network, Colorado Food Hub Network, was to map all of the food hubs. In the early 2000s, Farmers Union witnessed a huge proliferation of farmers markets, especially in Colorado, and we saw a lot of problems associated with that competition between farmers markets, and we were concerned that something similar was going to happen with food hub development. There was a real surge in interest in both urban and rural areas. So this mapping exercise was originally an effort to reduce duplication and encourage cooperation across regions and in local areas. This particular map that the La Montanita Co-op out of New Mexico helped us with identifies in green operational food hubs and then food hubs that were in planning stages. Interestingly, these food hubs were set up in a variety of ways: sole proprietorships, LLCs, traditional corporations, cooperatives, and nonprofit organizations. We basically saw them, though, differentiate into 2 broad categories: agricultural hubs and more consumer-oriented hubs. So we held 5 meetings with this peer network, and it culminated in a event in which we defined our common values and practices. And one of the common denominators was this desire to move from local food to regional food. Colorado has 5 very distinct agricultural regions that are laid out along our watersheds. For those of you that don't know, Colorado is known as the headwater state, and we supply water to approximately 13 other states, including the country of Mexico. About 1/3 of that water stays in the region, and much of that water is devoted to agricultural production. So we are an ag state, and we saw an opportunity to trade products across regions. And so it was an interesting opportunity, and we had approximately 12 groups, I think, participating in this process. It was nothing fancy, but basically a flip chart in a small room up in the mountain town of Salida on a very long day. And I basically facilitated this work as the value chain coordinator to identify commonalities and differences and explore how we might all work together. Out of this process, we identified 5 agricultural hubs. Rocky Mountain Farmers Union felt that this was an appropriate place to start, was supplying technical and financial resources to these hubs that were located in rural areas, because without the supply, there isn't much of a food system. So these groups were Southwest Farm Fresh in the Four Corners region of Colorado, the Valley Roots Food Hub in the San Luis Valley, Arkansas Valley Organic Growers in the Southeast, High Plains Food Cooperative in Western Kansas, and Peak to Plains, a distribution outfit based out of Colorado Springs. The result of this process of defining values and common practices was a memorandum of understanding that became our guiding document. And this quotation here is the lead-in. Hubs are to share common goals, values, principles, and best practices as specified in this memorandum of understanding. It's about a 7-page document. And underpinning this document, I would say, are the 7 internationally recognized cooperative principles of voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. The key values that this group identified in the MOU were sustainable agriculture, product quality and freshness, fair prices to farmers, loyalty to the hub and to customers, community and transparency, and then ideally food access. I do want to say sustainable agriculture was not exclusive of conventional agriculture. So this was, people were interested in casting a wide net to include as many family type farms as possible. And then onto the practice piece of the memorandum was food safety, liability and responsibility, standing behind your product essentially, pricing, products and services, farmer-producer identity preservation, payment systems, resource sharing, and then ideally production planning. These practices, basically, these are pretty general categories as you can see, and I probably don't have time to go into some of the particulars here, but I do want to say that this MOU I basically view as a public document, and at the end of this presentation, if you'd like to take down my email and obtain a copy of it, I'm glad to send it along. The memorandum also dealt with breaches to the agreement and conflict resolution. There's a lot of moving parts to food and food systems work, as we all know, and so here's a few of them: improper transportation of product, misinformation to the customer, unfair competition, disclosure of sensitive business information, delaying payment, direct selling and collaborating hubs, established marketing territory, and then lastly, these conflict resolution policies were designed really to avoid conflicts and address both minor and major conflicts. One piece I do want to pull out of this slide is the marketing territory piece. Now, when we set up this food hub network with these 5 agricultural hubs that I mentioned, each had a local area that they were targeting with wholesale sales and also cooperative CSA type programs. And so these areas were rather clearly defined, and there was an agreement that if there was a sales opportunity in someone else's territory, that sale would go through the collaborating hub. And so this was basically a way to manage cooperation and competition together. And we did have some breaches to the agreement, and this conflict resolution policy came in real handy, and basically was our first attempt to use this memorandum as a living document. Want to underscore the importance of distribution. This is really the piece that binds this food hub network together. We have a group based in Colorado Springs that acquired an old produce company and runs trucks throughout the region between the food hubs. Without this piece, it would be incredibly difficult to accomplish what we've been working on because of the long distances between these 5 hubs. Now, this Taproot cooperative, as I mentioned, is a federated co-op, 5 owner-member food hubs, and there's basically 2 levels of economic relationships going on here. The first is aggregated sales under the name Taproot, and this is essentially a mechanism to get product into the Denver metro area, which has a large percentage of the state of Colorado's population. Most of these hubs, by the way, are located in fairly remote areas, largely in southern Colorado. So aggregated sales, hubs sending their products together into the with the distribution partner into Denver. And this is the breakdown of how the system works. 5% is basically order fulfillment. That's one of the hubs that's hosting a local orbit ordering platform. 3% for hauling, 7% for staging and delivery. That's when the product arrives to Denver. Somebody breaks it down and gets it ready for the city distribution. And then 20% basically going to the origin hub for the product. So it's basically a 35% margin. And then the second strategy you see here is hub-to-hub trading. I mentioned the 5 distinctive production areas of Colorado. These hubs are trading product across regions to obtain complementary agricultural goods for their local sales. And so this cost of goods plus 12 to 15% basically reflects a hub-to-hub discount so that those products can still be priced more or less competitively and sold in the local area. And I would say there's a pretty equal amount of aggregated sales versus inter-hub trading that's occurring to date. And then I'll start to wind the presentation down here, but just to say this MOU has been really used as a living document, and we've begun to revise it as we go along. Putting these kinds of documents into action is a great use of a value chain coordinator's time. Of course, many food hub operators are extremely busy, and having one foot sort of out of the operations of the food trading business allows us to play this kind of role of making sure things don't fall through the cracks and making sure that that we're adhering to the terms of agreement that we set out together. None of this would be possible without leadership. The food hub managers in this particular region are top flight, and that's why I think the system is functioning as well as it is. It's not a mature system by any means yet. We just launched this in late 2016, but because of the leadership, I think our prospects are good ultimately for profitability and success. And then lastly, and this kind of ties back to the 7 cooperative principles of communication, cooperation, and transparency. Without buy-in to these kinds of values, these hubs would be a little more competitive, but we've been able to basically raise everybody's bar through the process of cooperating. Next up for us in this region is to try to work on interregional production planning. Hopefully this would reduce some duplication of products and increase volume of products that are in short supply. So thanks very much. There's my telephone number and email. If anybody would like a copy of the MOU or to discuss our work in general, I'd be happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Dan. We really appreciated hearing about how you managed to get all of these businesses that might naturally think of themselves as competitive as working together. And it sounds like, you know, this cooperative concept has really supported that process. So thanks for sharing, and stick around. If you have any questions for Dan, don't forget to put them into the questions box, and we'll get them at the end of the presentation. Okay, and also special thanks to Dan, who is a farmer himself and took some time out of the garlic planting season to be online with us today. So up next, we are going to look at an organization that has found great success in several different areas throughout the United States using their system, which has been carefully designed to move participating institutions toward continuous improvement in their purchasing practices. As you listen to Vanessa describe the Good Food Purchasing Program, considering how you might adapt its underlying principles to increase the efficacy of your own institutional efforts. So our presenter is Vanessa Zajfen, and she is the Director of Institutional Impact at the Center for Good Food Purchasing. Vanessa has been working on institutional purchasing of healthy, sustainable food in several different contexts. Her position at School Food Focus and USDA saw her supporting many school districts' farm-to-school efforts. She's also worked directly within a school district in San Diego, where she was able to source and serve over 1 million pounds of local and organic food. Also on her long list of accomplishments, she created the nation's first farm-to-wick program, has been a CSA manager, and founded a produce aggregation and distribution company. She's been very busy. So with that, I will hand the mic off to Vanessa to talk about good.
All right, perfect. It says I'm unmuted, so I'm assuming you can hear me. Ellie, is this correct?
Great. Yep, you're all good.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ellie, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to Wallace and Winrock for inviting me to speak today. I'm very happy to be here. I am here, as Ellie said, to speak to you today about the Center for Good Food Purchasing and our Good Food Purchasing program. As you heard, my name is Vanessa Zajfen. I'm the Director of Institutional Impact. And the Center for Good Food Purchasing, our flagship program is the Good Food Purchasing Program. And how it relates to today's topic, I will explain throughout the slides, but I think Ellie did a really good job of sort of setting that up. Essentially, the GFPP is a clearly defined, well-honed, and successful model for increasing purchases of sustainable, fair, local, humane, and healthy food by public institutions. And in this presentation, we'll describe the choices we've made in designing this program to achieve success. And we hope that someone working in the value chain coordination space will be able to take from this and adapt it or adopt it and to do as you will to assist with making those value-based procurements. If you're interested at the end of this to bring the program to your area, you should always contact me. But I think regardless of working with us directly, we believe the lessons we have learned are applicable to any environment. So first, let me explain what the center is. What the center is and what it does. We use the power of procurement to create a transparent and equitable food system that prioritizes the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment. And essentially, we do this through the adoption and implementation of the Good Food Purchasing Program by major institutions across the United States. And I'll explain what the Good Food Purchasing Program is in just a moment. You can see from this slide, are relying on public procurement and leveraging public procurement in public agencies to shift the procurement space and dollars. Our participants make up about 50% school districts and 50% public municipalities, meaning county detention facilities, concession stands in a city hall, and a number of other types of public food service operations. As you can see here, we have 28 participants in 14 cities, and we're leveraging about a collective $1 billion in public food spends. If you want to learn more about who's enrolled, you're welcome to visit our website, and you can get the specific names of folks in each area. Sorry, the slides, still getting used to moving them forward. There we go. So what exactly is the Good Food Purchasing Program? It is a flexible framework that encourages large institutions to direct their buying power towards 5 core values. And you'll hear this word core values a lot, but our 5 core values are local economies, environmental sustainability, valued workforce, animal welfare, and nutrition. Essentially, our program is designed to do for the food system what LEED certification did for green buildings. And at the heart of this purchasing program is our standard, which essentially enables us to measure values-based procurement performance in the 5 value categories I just listed. A little bit about how it works. Institutions earn points based on how much money they spend on food that falls within our standards. So how well they're doing at meeting third-party certifications and other required procurement actions that we have. Third-party certifications and different procurement actions carry different weight and are rated differently at level 1, 2, or 3. And these certifications have been identified as meaningful and ranked by national experts for each of the 5 value categories. And we have found that third-party certifications are incredibly effective at targeting procurements towards specific values and producer types, like those that you might be working with in your value chains. But, you know, they're not entirely without issue, but it's, you know, it's been a great model for us thus far. A little bit about how our scoring works. So to establish a score within our program, we need to conduct a baseline assessment of all the food an institution is buying. And once we've done that, we break down for them how much of those purchases as a percentage of their total food budget meets our standard and thus our definition of good food. A star rating is awarded to an institution based on how many points an institution earns. And to achieve a star rating, at a minimum, an institution must meet baseline requirements in each value category. This allows for a lot of flexibility for institutions to focus their procurement and actions on those value categories most important and meaningful for them. So for example, a school district may score really well in value in our value category for local economies and nutrition, but may be challenged by animal welfare and environmental sustainability. So they focus on meeting the minimum requirements in those value categories. And I will say that our minimum requirements are rather rigorous, so don't be fooled by the term minimum requirement. But they will spend their time meeting that minimum and then shift their focus and the majority of their energy to the value categories that are most meaningful and important to them and their clients. Our commitment to our participants, there are many, but I think these are probably the ones that might be most of interest to this group. And essentially with this data and these standards, we're able to give voice to our customers' values-based procurement goals. We can measure how well they perform in those to achieve those goals. They can also understand how their supply chains perform against our standard and recognize and act upon either opportunities or gaps to improve their procurements, and so on and so forth. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you how these partnerships work and how policy adoption has worked in some cities and Los Angeles specifically. And what's going to follow is an illustration of how the GFPP partnerships and program works in LA at this moment. The adoption of this particular policy was really complex because it was our first city to adopt the policy in 2012, sorry. So the details of all of that, I can direct you to some veteran staff here if you want to learn more about those. But essentially what we've learned in LA is that making inroads to any institutional purchaser is not without its challenges. And the GFPP is just one program that allows institutions to buy from value chains. And for us, program and policy adoptions happen differently in each institution. So for example, some institutions simply enroll in our program because they find it interesting and want to do it, while others are strongly encouraged to adopt this policy through local advocacy campaigns. So LA is where there was a very strong advocacy campaign to assist the city of LA and the school district, Unified School District there to adopt our program. And because of that, they have a really robust set of partners that are assisting them in implementing the program. And so this is kind of how it works. Essentially, the center will manage the good food purchasing program and facilitate the overall initiative by managing the standard and collaborating with these partners that I'm going to talk about to do the many things they do to ensure that the GFPP program is a success in their community. So what happens typically is if someone is interested in bringing the program to their city, there will be a local lead that facilitates kind of the political and institutional relationships in a community and convenes stakeholders that are interested in supporting this initiative there. Then we have core partners that kind of sit between local leads and national partners to facilitate even more amongst those two partner types and build relationships, and then also manage communications for our local coalitions should they need assistance in doing that. Then we have our national partners that offer additional political support and relationships to our local coalitions. They also do a lot of the supply chain accountability. So we'll have experts in the field helping with our standards, but also providing information to institutions about those standards in a particular value category. And they do a lot of research and support for us in that way. And then, of course, we have our institutional partners that are the ones that adopt and implement the policy and make these significant shifts in their practices. Not going to read every word on the slide, but you can see the impact that we've had in LA since its implementation in 2012, and it's pretty significant and something that we are certainly proud of. And then something we wanted to point out, of course, to you is our amazing partners. We have a tremendous number of partners, and we're very lucky, and we work with them in a number of different ways. And this is an example of the many types of local coalitions we work with to get the GFPP adopted or to get institutions enrolled in our program. And as you can see, a lot of these are food policy councils or food systems alliances. And we think one reason why the GFPP has the strong support that it does by our partners is that it's offered many of our partners a strong point around which to organize the disparate local food initiatives around a single rallying point, and one which can be easily articulated and, in fact, measured. Next are our national partners, again, an amazing group of organizations that we work with. Our core and national partners work with us on setting and vetting our standards, plus provide TA for participants related to their value category of expertise. What you don't see here is our standards committee. We have a standards committee. There's 5 standards committees, one for each value category, and folks on that help us to identify, vet, and rank the third-party certifications and identify the types of actions that organizations can take in each standard to gain points. And then they work with us to define whether those certifications and actions are level 1, level 2, or level 3. And we update our standards every 5 years. So a little bit about what happens once the policy has been adopted, which is quite a bit. So keep in mind, what is listed on this slide doesn't necessarily require the GFPP per se, but the GFPP provides this work a strong framework instead of guiding, and again, measurable principles around which values-based procurement can coalesce. So we come in once the policy has been adopted or somebody has enrolled in our program, and we gather all the purchasing data from an enrollee. We clean it all up and normalize it, and we pass it through our scoring system and present the enrollee with a report, or it's either a baseline or an annual assessment. We then take those assessments and we set procurement goals with the enrollee via an action plan. And these are annual action plans we update together on a yearly basis to guide the procurement actions and activities that that organization will be doing throughout the remainder of the year. Then we help participants take action in a number of ways, but to do one specifically is we provide a lot of supply chain research and information to our enrollees. And then again, we'll track that progress at the end of a year and provide an additional assessment to them. And then we always like to celebrate success, big or little. We think that's very important to motivate further engagement and change. So we thought it would be useful for you to see just some of the data and a snapshot of a baseline assessment so you can get an understanding of what I'm talking about. This is just sort of the very introduction to an assessment where we break down and provide a basic summary of how the food budget is actually being spent by product category for a client of ours. The next you'll see is how we break out each value category. This is the local values, the local economy value category. And this type of analysis repeats itself for each value category. So they'll kind of see this layout for themselves as it relates to each value category and how they're spending their money. You can see from the slide here that 25% of the food spend is locally sourced, which equals about $2 million. They've earned 7 points in local economies. We show how that breaks out based on level 1, level 2, and level 3 spending. And we show how that breaks out based on product category and which is local and at what level. Also, wanted to share with you, we get into a little bit more granular detail with our clients as well, that we share with them kind of exactly where their money is being spent and by whom, or on whom, sorry, so that they can get a greater understanding of where their money is being invested and how and if they want to make any shifts in particular to and with those procurements. And so it's a very helpful data for them to do that. And then, you know, Ellie had talked about the organizational scale for policy, and I think this is the reason why I wanted to show you a little bit more about what we do in that take action category is there's a lot we can do, but as it relates to institutional policies that, say, a value chain coordinator can assist with, I think two things that we found to be very powerful in our work is to assist institutions in goal setting, right? So it's always best if you have data that can help you with that goal setting, for obvious reasons, such as it's much easier to set a goal and then benchmark your success towards that goal and then measure that success towards that goal. But goal setting has been very important in what we do. And then also determining and defining mechanisms for these procurements. So helping organizations to define how they can buy these foods and figure out what those ways are in which they can tap into value chains, either through their solicitations and contracts, do they need specific staffing positions, so on and so forth. Finally, I just wanted to leave the group here with one more example of how an organization used their enrollment in the GFPP to tap into local value chains. And this is Cook County Board of Commissioners in Illinois. They are working with one county hospital and one county prison, and that's about a $20 million spend. They prioritize their work in the local economies value category and are using the GFPP program to emphasize strategies that address inequitable access to institutional supply chains for growers and food business owners of color. So they're making sure that those procurement staff that are affected or in charge of these kinds of procurements will begin to prioritize these stakeholders through the inclusion in their solicitations or potential set-asides that they might have in their contracts, or just simply making an effort to outreach and contact and learn about these kinds of supplier types. The commissioners also convened a task force to educate staff in their affected departments about the emphasis, about this emphasis, and in general to just facilitate peer-to-peer support systems within affected departments. So we think this is just a great example of kind of the institutional policies that take place once our program is in place and has taken root. And with that, I'll conclude and pass it back to Ellie.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa. So we've now seen two projects and sort of a handful of projects from Vanessa at a bunch of different scales with different specific ends. But I think you'll see that in both examples, there was a careful design of policy that was meant to keep all parties well informed, and the policies have to be clear, they have to respect the needs of all parties, they have to be easy to understand, and that's how you get buy-in from a lot of different partners. So with that, we have some great questions coming in. Don't forget, if you have a question for our panelists, you can send it through the question box in your control panel on the side. So let's see, this is a good one. This is for Dan. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating the memorandum of understanding between the different hubs? Was that something that you created and then the hubs gave you feedback, or did you all sort of co-create it together? And how did you make a final decision?
Yeah, great question. It was a participatory exercise. I think we spent probably 6 hours hammering out first the values and then the practices. And so, of course, there was a lot of discussion there. We captured all of those notes. We took them back to the Farmers Union office. My supervisor, Bill Stevenson, the head of the Cooperative Development Center, was formerly a corporate lawyer and is good with contracts and memorandums. And so we've really, I would say, kind of perfected a memorandum that's very user-friendly for farmers. It's not overly legalistic. And so that was then circulated to all of the food hubs, a draft of that, and was tweaked over a number of months, and then finalized and signed actually by a representative of each food hub. Cool.
And another question sort of along that same line. You mentioned that there had been some breaches of MOU. Is that something that you, as sort of a VCC in the center, handle? How does that work when someone breaks the rules?
Yeah, people are encouraged to handle that directly between the two parties that have a grievance with each other. The first time that it occurred, I was the one who managed the conflict. And we pretty quickly resolved it by giving people an opportunity to sort of vent their frustrations, and then moving to action steps for how to avoid it in the future. And just, it was an opportunity, honestly, to affirm the policies that had already been in place, but in the sweep of busyness and, you know, transacting with food, people just lost sight of it and had gone after a sale. So since that one event, I think there was one additional event that was handled directly between food hub managers, but it didn't take long to sort of learn and respect each other's territories.
Cool. How about a question for Vanessa? So here's a question about, do institutions have to pay for an assessment, action plan, and tracking? How does your financial relationship work with the institutions?
Good question. Yes, institutions, there is a fee associated with the baseline assessment and the continued training and technical assistance associated with that from year over year. We have different models. Obviously, we don't want the fee to be a barrier to entry for anybody, and we have different funding models in different regions. So sometimes there'll be foundations that pay for a particular institution's assessment fee. Sometimes we have just the organization themselves will pay for the assessment fee and ongoing training and technical assistance associated with that. So it really varies, and the fees slide in scale based on the food budget associated with each institution as well.
Cool. Since this webinar is being brought to us in partnership with Greenbelt Fund out of Ontario, Vanessa, has GFPP ever worked in Canada? Would you be interested? Would you be able to?
We have not. I think we would be very interested in doing so. And to do so, we'd have to sort of suss out and flesh out some local partners. And if there are any that come to mind, please do connect us. I think we'd have to amend the standards a little bit to reflect specific certifications in Canada.
Instead of pounds.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. Yeah. No, definitely open to discussing that.
Cool. So Vanessa, someone had a sort of technical question about some of the definitions. You know, the word local gets kicked around a lot, and it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. How do you all define that or connect that concept to something a little more concrete?
Yeah, so good question. And again, that is something that is worked out by our standards committee when it comes time to sort of revising and addressing the standards that we do have in place. But essentially, we have sort of three pillars to our local economy's definition. It's distance. So we hover around a 250-mile radius for most items except for beef, which is a 500-mile radius from the institutions. We focus on ownership of an organization. So family farm or cooperatively owned business qualifies as our local definition. And then the size of the operation. So we have very large-scale operations as defined by the USDA. We have large-scale operations and then medium-scale operations. And that's our level 1, level 2, and level 3, how that breaks out. Mostly the size of the organization, farm, manufacturer that you're working with. And then if you're working with very small farms, we have sort of what we call extra points that you get for that extra effort to work with smaller operations.
That seems like a logical way to break it down. Is sustainability or conservation taken into account, or is that a different consideration?
It's a different value category. So that's our environmental sustainability value category. And you know, products cross value categories, so scoring can get complicated in that sense. But yeah, we have to sort of like compartmentalize in some way what the standards are, and then a product can cross those compartments, so to speak, or the categories. Just depends on what it is. You know, like a USDA certified organic producer that is 250 miles away from your organization will get you both local points and environmental sustainability points.
Cool. Dan, here's one for you. Did the hubs that that you brought together already have existing relationships, or did you have to spend a lot of time sort of getting them to know each other and trust each other? How did those relationships form, and how active was that process?
I would say people knew of each other's work, but I mentioned there were these 5 initial meetings that were more peer networking type meetings. So it really happened in that context. We tried to move those meetings around the state a little bit so that they were accessible to different groups, and also provide telephonic access so people could jump on a conference call. So that was really where it happened, and those were usually 4-hour meetings, and so we designed them with some agenda points, but also with plenty of time for people just to kind of talk shop. And so those 5 meetings really became the foundation, I think, for the sort of trust that developed over time, the rapport and development of opportunities, buying and selling to each other.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel like, sort of as the person that was driving this train, did you feel like you had to work really hard to gain people's trust? What was that like for you?
I felt like people came to the table pretty willing to work with one another. And so a lot of it was just FaceTime. And I think we've become pretty good facilitators, I think, over the year of group process, and we would start meetings on time, end meetings on time, make room for conflicts, but try to move through it quickly. And so a lot of this, I think, happens just sort of in the culture of the meeting space that the value chain coordinator or the lead person sets. And so that piece, I think, was real important.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Here's a good one for Vanessa. What's the value of a star rating for the institution? Like, how does that translate into benefit for them? Is it that they just get to turn around and say that to their public, or how do you sort of incentivize an institution to say it's worth it for you to go for 10 or 15 more points, or whatever the difference might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we reasons for why people enroll in our program are different based on the institution. I think that first and foremost, they've been looking for ways to sort of quantify what they're doing in this space so that they can turn around and say to clients, either be it parents or students or hospital patients, like, look, this is what we're doing for you. This is the effort we're making in this space. Like, we're not just saying we're buying good food. Here is the measurement of that effort. And I think that has a lot of value for operators. And it helps them to, like we said, articulate their values and their progress and their efforts in this space. For others, they're trying to draw the connection to sort of the commitment to the program and how that affects sort of participation in their meal program. Others are using this as a opportunity for, increased communication between their customer base, and saying, like, how can they connect with them and say, like, what are you interested in seeing us do, and using this as a tool to sort of work with some of their customer bases. That's mostly happening in school districts, and sort of co-creating a program with their clients in creative spaces. So there's just a lot of different things that drive people to this and make them want to do well in one particular value category or not. I think also a little bit of it is like, hey, how well is my contemporary doing? I want to do better than them. There's a little bit of that for sure. Mm-hmm. Nothing like healthy competition. So yeah, lots of reasons and lots of values that they see in it. So
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. Vanessa, could you talk a little bit about the relationship between food policy councils and Center for Good Food Purchasing? I guess it probably varies, but I know that, the LA Food Policy Council was sort of the driving force behind the creation of the center. So could you talk a little bit about how that relationship manifests, maybe in a couple of different examples?
Yeah, I am sort of less, my articulation of that relationship is going to be not as rich as, say, Alexa or Colleen, my colleagues who have been doing this for the past 5 or 10 years, because it's a complicated one, and it's an incredible relationship and a powerful one. The LA Food Policy Council is a unique one in the sense that it was the council that the center spun out from, and it was because of the work that LA Food Policy Council did in advocating for the adoption of the policy by the city of LA and the school district and other municipalities in that area that ultimately led to this standard and this work. So that one's very unique and a very special one. But it's the power of these policies, food policy councils, and their efforts to bring to their cities and their stakeholders this program. And it's really a strong partnership with which we sort of tag team these efforts, right? So we're capable of creating the framework, and they're capable of sort of bringing that localized context to the framework, which I think is really important because, at the end of the day, if there's nobody on the ground that can kind of do sort of some of the things that, say, a value chain coordinator can do for those institutions, we might be missing a lot of that local economies and those particular businesses that may be excluded from these supply chain interactions without the help of the food policy councils. So they're very rich and dynamic, and I know I didn't do it justice, but because I haven't had the opportunity to go through the process with one of them, but it's impressive what they've been able to do and how we've supported one another in bringing this to different institutions across the United States.
I am going to do a little shameless Wallace Center plug. We were lucky enough to interview Paula Daniels, who is the co-founder of the Center for Good Food Purchasing, about sort of the story of how she went from working in the LA Food Policy Council to creating the center. So I just put a link to that podcast in the chat box so everybody can take a listen to hear a little bit more of the backstory of the creation of the center. And Paula is just a really excellent storyteller, so worth a listen.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. You saved me.
Get the listen number up too for us. Okay, well, I think unless Dan and Vanessa, you have any questions for each other, we got through a lot of the good ones, and I have a little wrap up to do. Nothing? Okay. Well, with that, I am going to say thank you to both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your wisdom with us. And as you can see, Vanessa and Dan have both shared their email addresses, so feel free to follow up with them directly if you have any other more complicated questions. And as always, this webinar is being recorded. We post all of our archived webinars at ngfn.org/webinars. We have, I think, 80 or 90 of them at this point, and they're all organized by topic. So you can learn from a really broad range of experts on whichever topic is most interesting to you. Normally they are Thursdays at 3:30. We have one next Thursday on community kitchens, incubators, and accelerators. We have a couple really interesting examples of different ways that people drive economic development through small-scale processing. So check that out next Thursday at 3:30 Eastern. You can sign up at ngfn.org/webinars to check that out. Wallace Center also has lots of communities of practice that you are welcome to join, including the Food System Leadership Network. The Food System Leadership Network actually created the podcast that I shared with you, but they are a community of practice that is aimed at increasing capacity and connection for community-based nonprofits that use food systems as a lever for social change. There are a ton of resources and tools available on the Food System Leadership Network website, which you can find here. And right now, the Food System Leadership Network is looking for trainers to contribute to their nonprofit bootcamp e-learning series, which is a webinar training series that's focused on strengthening the organizational effectiveness of nonprofit community-based organizations. So if you are interested in leading a training, the FSLN is looking for experienced and diverse trainers with expertise in nonprofit leadership, operations, and management to design and deliver these courses on whichever topic area you might be an expert in. So the deadline to apply is October 31st, extra spooky. So check that out with the link at the bottom. And yeah, we would love to get a really broad range of presenters to share their wisdom there. So lastly, I wanted to let you know that you can email us here at contact@ngfn.org. And also let me remind you to take the survey that you should get in your inbox right after the end of the webinar. It's really helpful to us to be able to refine our offerings. So with that in mind, thank you all for your time today, and to our Canadian friends who joined us, and particularly to our brilliant presenters who shared their wisdom and their time with us. And with that, this webinar is ending.